Rossi's secret Michelin tires. In the early 2000s, Valentino Rossi wasn't just winning MotoGP races, he was dominating. But what his rivals didn't know was that a hidden advantage was helping him. Special Michelin tires designed exclusively for him, yet labeled as equal to everyone else. Michelin, the sport's dominant tire supplier, had always claimed neutrality. All factory riders from Yamaha, Honda, to Ducati were promised the same tire compounds, constructions, and performance. But behind closed doors, Rossi's inner circle worked directly with Michelin engineers, feeding them precise feedback after each session. The result? Rossi's bike was fitted with custom front tires, made from a softer, more responsive compound designed around his aggressive braking and corner entry style. These tires weren't part of the standard Michelin batches. They were manufactured in limited quantities, sometimes in single pairs, just for Rossi's weekend use. Rivals like Colin Edwards, on the same Yamaha machinery, found themselves lapping nearly half a second slower. Data engineers on rival teams were baffled. Identical machinery, identical tires. Yet Rossi's corner entry speed and tire degradation figures didn't match known physics. At the 2007 Estoril Grand Prix, Casey Stoner, then leading the championship, finally said what everyone suspected: Michelin was favoring Rossi. Publicly, Stoner accused the French supplier of giving Rossi tires no one else could get. That pressure worked. Weeks later, Michelin admitted it. They had indeed been supplying different front tire constructions to different riders. Rossi's tires weren't illegal, but they weren't equal either. What Michelin considered technical partnerships, the paddock saw as covert favoritism. For MotoGP, the fallout was immediate. The scandal, dubbed Tiregate, forced the FIM and Dorna to act. By 2009, MotoGP abolished open tire supply. Instead, it mandated a single tire rule, appointing Bridgestone as the sole supplier. Every rider would get identical tires from a standardized pool. No private deals, no special compound. Rossi's secret Michelin tires didn't just win him races, they ended the era of open tire competition in MotoGP entirely. Honda's hidden traction control. In the early 2000s, Honda's RC211V was nearly unbeatable. Its V5 engine was the most powerful on the grid, but raw power wasn't Honda's secret weapon. Hidden inside its electronics was a piece of technology no other team had: traction control far beyond its time. At the start of MotoGP's four-stroke era, electronics were basic. Most teams were still tuning throttle response and basic engine braking. Honda, however, had quietly developed a closed-loop traction control system embedded deep within its ECU. This black box system monitored wheel speed, throttle input, and lean angle in real time, modulating power delivery automatically whenever wheel spin was detected. Riders like Valentino Rossi and Sete Gibernau were winning races, but when Honda's RC211V was on form, it looked like it was riding itself out of corners. Rival teams couldn't explain why Honda bikes had such smooth corner exits while conserving rear tire life. The answer? While their riders were controlling power manually, Honda's ECU was adjusting throttle delivery behind the scene. This system wasn't illegal. There were no regulations defining electronic controls, but other manufacturers didn't even know such software was possible, let alone legal. Honda kept the system hidden, refusing to disclose their ECU functions during technical inspection. Eventually, suspicion grew. Rivals filed protests, not to ban the system, but to know what Honda was hiding. When no answers came, the FIM intervened. In 2003, MotoGP introduced the first electronics transparency regulations. From that moment, every manufacturer had to declare their ECU functionalities. The loophole that Honda exploited using hidden, undeclared software to control bike dynamics was closed. Honda's traction control wasn't just an innovation, it was a technological ambush, and it forced MotoGP to start regulating software itself. Yamaha's underseat fuel trick. Yamaha had always chased Honda's power advantage, but in the mid-2000s, they found a trick that didn't involve the engine at all. It involved fuel. Not the kind you burn, but the way you carry it. MotoGP's fuel capacity limit was strict, 22 liters maximum. Tanks had to comply, but inspections focused on declared capacity and post-race measurements. Yamaha engineers, however, understood that inspections checked fuel content, not fuel system design, so they innovated. Instead of a traditional top-mounted tank, Yamaha's bikes carried fuel under the rider's seat, lowering the center of gravity and improving handling. Inside this underseat tank, Yamaha fitted auxiliary fuel bladders. These flexible pockets expanded inside the tank, effectively increasing usable fuel volume without altering official tank measurements. Here's how it worked. Before scrutineering, Yamaha drained the tanks in a way that made the auxiliary bladders collapse, presenting a standard capacity during inspection. But once refueled during practice sessions, the bladders expanded under fuel pressure, giving the bike an extra half-liter to 1 liter of fuel. It wasn't enough to run extra race distance, but during practice and qualifying, it allowed for longer stints and better run planning. Rivals noticed Yamaha could run more laps than anyone else during practice without refueling. Suspicions grew, but without direct evidence, no formal protest succeeded. MotoGP's governing body responded anyway. Rules were rewritten. Fuel tanks had to be single-piece designs, fully visible, and declared in their entirety. Post-session fuel inspections required full drainage under controlled conditions, ensuring auxiliary bladders couldn't hide excess fuel. Yamaha's underseat fuel trick didn't result in a public penalty, but it forced MotoGP to rewrite fuel system regulations permanently, and the loophole closed forever. Yamaha's valve gate. In 2020, Yamaha's title hopes imploded, not because of a bad bike, but because of a secret. Early in the season, Yamaha engineers discovered a serious reliability flaw. Their engines were failing. The cause? Defective valves that couldn't handle prolonged high RPM usage. But instead of following the rules and requesting approval from the Manufacturers Association to change engine components, Yamaha made a dangerous choice. They secretly swapped out the valves for a different specification without telling anyone. Mid-season, their bikes suddenly looked faster. Rival teams grew suspicious. Normally, any internal engine part modifications must be approved by the MSMA before use. Yamaha's engineers gambled, fitting non-homologated valves and hoping to go unnoticed. They didn't. After protests from rival teams and investigation by MotoGP officials, Yamaha was caught. The punishment was swift and unprecedented. Yamaha was docked 50 manufacturer championship points, a crushing blow in a title fight. However, the riders, Fabio Quartararo, Maverick Vinales, and Valentino Rossi, were allowed to keep their individual points, as officials judged that the riders themselves were not directly involved in the violation. The fallout forced MotoGP to tighten its parts approval system. Now, any mid-season component change requires full disclosure and MSMA approval. Yamaha's secret valve swap became one of the sport's most infamous technical scandals, and the punishment served as a warning. In MotoGP, hidden changes never stay hidden. Ducati's spoon device. In 2019, Ducati showed up with a strange addition to their Desmos DC GP bike, a small carbon scoop mounted beneath the swing arm. They claimed it was a simple innovation to cool the rear tire, but every other factory team, Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Aprilia, knew better. The spoon device didn't behave like a cooler. The airflow from under the bike didn't logically reach the rear tire in a way that would significantly lower its temperature. What it did do, however, was generate downforce. By directing airflow downward from beneath the swing arm, the device pushed the rear of the bike closer to the track at high speeds. This improved acceleration stability and increased rear tire grip. Rival teams immediately protested, arguing that aerodynamic devices mounted outside the fairing were illegal under MotoGP regulations. The case was taken to MotoGP's Court of Appeal. Ducati's defense was clever. They claimed the device's primary purpose was tire cooling, not aerodynamic performance. Since the regulations didn't explicitly ban swing arm mounted airflow parts for cooling purposes, the court ruled the device legal. But the controversy didn't end there. The FIM, embarrassed by the loophole, rewrote the aero regulations. They clarified that no airflow directing components could be mounted outside the fairing unless serving a clearly defined mechanical or cooling purpose, closing the gray area Ducati had exploited. Ducati's spoon device wasn't just a piece of carbon, it was a loophole that forced MotoGP to redefine what aerodynamic development was allowed and what wasn't. Honda's invisible brake ducts. In 2004, Honda engineers were facing a challenge. Their carbon brakes were overheating in hotter races. While rival teams used visible external brake cooling ducts, Honda wanted a solution that wouldn't be seen or copied, so they hid it. Inside the front wheel hub of the RC211V, rivals believed Honda may have hidden internal brake ducts, channeling airflow directly onto the brake calipers without using any visible scoops or ducts. From the outside, their front wheel looked identical to everyone else's. During races, Honda's brakes ran cooler and more consistently than their rival. Other teams suspected something but couldn't prove it until Yamaha mechanics examining post-race parts noticed airflow marks inside the wheel hub. When the discovery leaked, Yamaha filed a formal complaint arguing that Honda had installed an undeclared aerodynamic system, but Honda wasn't penalized. The regulations at the time only covered external brake cooling systems. Internal airflow channels weren't banned because no one had thought to ban them. However, MotoGP's response was swift. The rules were updated. Any airflow modification system, whether external or internal, had to be declared and visible to scrutineers. Honda's invisible brake ducts were never punished, but their hidden cooling trick changed how MotoGP regulated brake systems forever. Suzuki's rear ride height trick. trick. In 2021, Suzuki engineers launched something revolutionary, the first rear ride height adjuster usable mid-race. Until then, ride height devices were only used at race starts to prevent wheelie, but Suzuki created a manually activated system that allowed riders to lower the rear of the bike after exiting corners, compressing the suspension to enhance acceleration stability. This system exploited a loophole. MotoGP regulations only covered launch devices. There were no specific rules banning manual ride height adjustment during races. Once Ducati, Honda, and KTM realized Suzuki's advantage, they copied the system. Rear ride height devices became standard across the grid, but MotoGP officials knew the technology was spiraling. In 2023, they banned front ride height devices entirely and restricted rear systems, outlawing mid-race height adjustments. Suzuki's innovation wasn't illegal when it debuted, but within 2 years, the system it pioneered was forced out of MotoGP because it worked too well. Ducati's whole shot start system. In 2019, Ducati unveiled a weapon that left the entire grid scrambling: the whole shot device. Mounted on the front fork, this manually activated system compressed the suspension, locking the front lower before race starts. The purpose was simple: reduce front wheel lift, improve launch stability, and give Ducati riders a clean getaway. No rule specifically banned suspension locking systems for starts. Ducati had exploited a blind spot in the regulations. At the Qatar GP, Ducati bikes exploded off the line, consistently gaining multiple positions before the first corner. Rival manufacturers Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki watched in disbelief. What they assumed was pure engine power turned out to be Ducati's engineering trick. Protests followed almost immediately. Manufacturers argued the device violated suspension modification rules during Parc Fermé, but Ducati defended their innovation successfully. Once activated manually, the device required no electronic control and complied with the regulations as written. MotoGP allowed the whole shot device. Within a season, every team had built a version of Ducati's trick, but the long-term consequence was different. The FIM rewrote the suspension regulations. Manual ride height systems were restricted in their operation, and electronic versions were banned outright. Ducati's whole shot device wasn't just legal, it forced MotoGP to regulate ride height systems for the first time. Yamaha's Brno fuel temperature trick. At the 2004 Brno Grand Prix, Yamaha was accused of manipulating something no one had considered before: fuel temperature. Teams knew that cooling fuel before combustion improved density and combustion efficiency. Regulations stated that fuel must be kept at ambient temperature, but Yamaha engineers found a way around it. They stored their race fuel in insulated tanks designed to slow temperature rise. During qualifying, rival teams noted that Yamaha bikes performed unusually well in hot conditions. After fuel checks, Yamaha's samples were recorded at the minimum allowable threshold. Teams suspected Yamaha had transported pre-chilled fuel to the circuit using insulation to prevent temperature increase. Yamaha wasn't penalized. The rules required fuel to be at ambient temperature during filling, but not necessarily when stored prior to use. After complaints, MotoGP responded. Officials introduced mandatory fuel temperature monitoring, using live telemetry to monitor fuel temperature at all times before combustion. From that moment, fuel cooling manipulation was effectively banned. Yamaha's borderline tactic rewrote the fuel regulation without earning a single penalty. Honda's seamless gearbox secrecy. Between 2011 and 2013, Honda gained a massive advantage, one it kept hidden for as long as possible. Their riders were using a seamless shift gearbox, allowing them to change gears without cutting throttle or disengaging the clutch. The result was brutal: faster gear changes, uninterrupted acceleration, and less tire wear. Honda kept the technology hidden inside their gearbox casing, sealed and inaccessible to inspection. Yamaha and Ducati mechanics couldn't explain how Honda riders carried momentum so smoothly out of corners. For nearly 2 years, Honda refused to disclose the technology's existence, treating it as proprietary. It wasn't until Yamaha reverse engineered and introduced its own version that Honda's secret was exposed. Though not illegal, Honda's secrecy prompted MotoGP to tighten its gearbox disclosure rules, forcing teams to declare transmission technologies. Honda's seamless gearbox didn't just redefine performance, it changed the transparency expectations in MotoGP's technical regulations.